Hi there, welcome to 42 Pursuit. I'm Gavin. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I put together this, what I'm calling the Levitating Coffee Table. This is my first foray into welding, and I think it turned out pretty well. If you're interested in seeing how this went together, stick around. I start out by making some legs. These are going to be made out of 2" by 4" square tube steel. Here I'm scoring my cut lines with a utility knife and then adding blue tape on the side that I want to keep so it's easier to see as I'm using the angle grinder to cut it off. Now there's better tools for making cuts like these, but if all you've got is an angle grinder, you can make it work. I tried to leave just a little bit of extra material on each cut so that I could come back later with a flat disc and grind that back right to the line. After a bunch of cutting, the next step is to drill 2 holes in each of the table legs on the inside face of one of the long pieces. This will provide mounting points for the table. Using a thread tap, threads are cut into each hole so they can accept a 1/4-20 bolt. Now since these pieces were cut with an angle grinder, the corners weren't quite as precise as I would have liked, so I had a bright idea to take a piece of scrap wood and cut it to the inner dimensions of the legs. Clamping the top and bottom of the leg pieces together with that in between will make sure that they stay parallel. To make sure I wasn't warping the legs out of square with the heat from the welding, I first tacked all the pieces together and then started filling in all the gaps with a full bead of weld. As this was my first welding project, the welds definitely didn't come out perfect the first try. But since I was going to paint this anyway, I would weld a seam, grind that weld flat, and then come back and fill in any voids or spots that I missed with more weld, and then grind that flat, and rinse and repeat until things started to look presentable. With both legs welded up, it's painting time. I first wiped them down with acetone to clean and degrease them, and then conveniently suspended them with some bolts inserted in the mounting holes. First, a coat of gross brown primer, and then the nice final black. With the legs done, now it's time to start on the tabletop. I'll be using this beautiful blue pine. I want to show off that nice coloring, so I'm trying to be strategic here and get the best possible pieces for the most visible faces of this table. After a few passes through the table saw to clean up the edges, and a few feeds through the planer, these boards will be ready for glue up. I'm going to be using dominoes to help with the alignment on this glue up, but that's not the only way that you can do this. You can also use a biscuit joiner, a dowel joiner, or some clamping cauls to keep things flat and straight. This part's pretty self-explanatory. Make sure all your parts are oriented correctly, add some glue, add some dominoes, and clamp everything together. We're going to be making 2 panels just like this. This first one will be for the bottom shelf of the table, and the second, longer one, will be for the top and sides of the table. That'll make more sense in just a second. These pieces are a little longer and more unwieldy, so I used a clamp to hold them together while I marked the positions for the dominoes. And it's the same process all over again. After a full day of drying, these panels are good to go. Before this next step, these pieces need to be the same width. And to make sure that there's no impressions left over from the clamps, I'm cutting off a little bit from each side. To add a little bit of clarity on these next cuts, let's quick pause and see what we're looking at. Now we're going to start with the shorter of the 2 boards. This is going to be the bottom piece. It needs to be cut precisely to length with 2 45-degree miters. Now the larger piece is a little bit more tricky because I want to create a continuous flow of grain from the top surface down both sides. This is commonly referred to as a waterfall. To do this, the top piece needs to be cut to the precise length of the bottom piece that was already cut with perfect 45s on each end. Then the 2 end pieces need to be cut to the exact same lengths with 45-degree cuts on each end, while trying to only remove a saw blade width of material from the edges that are closest to the top piece. This will create the illusion that the top piece flows directly into the side pieces. Now with all that figured out, all I have to do is cut 8 perfect miters at the perfect length and not make any mistakes. For this kind of cut, a track saw is the perfect tool for the job, and it doesn't have to be black and green like mine. Any color will work just fine. Fortunately, I thought about this part just enough that I didn't make any mistakes. Now it's time to break out the domino again to help with all the corner alignment. Here I've got all 4 pieces dry fit and aligned correctly, and I flipped the whole thing so the bottom is facing up. I'm adding these slots with the domino to help with alignment during final assembly, and these screws to hold everything together, as this bottom piece will not be glued to the top and side pieces. And here's a quick tip that hopefully you don't have to learn the hard way. Sand the inside of the box before you assemble it. It's a lot easier that way. Now, like I mentioned earlier, these dominoes are only used for alignment of the bottom shelf. I'm being careful here and making sure that the dominoes are only glued to the side pieces and not the bottom. And now I can set the bottom piece on to make sure everything's square and straight, and screw and clamp everything together, and now I just have to wait until the glue dries. While sanding here, I noticed that there was a slight gap on the top miters. Now, let me show you a trick. You can squeeze some glue into the gap and then use a screwdriver as a burnisher to compress the fibers together. Then, when you hit it with some sandpaper, it'll create some fine dust that will stick to the glue in any remaining small gaps and make them completely disappear. How about that? As I'm finishing this tabletop with a water-based polyurethane, I'm first raising the grain with a spray bottle of water and a rag, letting it sit a while and then sanding down any of the raised grain before giving it the 3 coats of polyurethane. To make sure I get accurate placement on the mounting holes, I'm using these dowel alignment pins that happen to fit perfectly in a 1/4-20 hole. The pokey bit creates a slight indentation where I need to drill the hole in the tabletop. And to make sure I'm accounting for any future wood movement, I'm using a second piece of wood to help elongate the mounting holes. Now all that's left is to bolt everything together, put the top on, screw that down, and show the wife. All right, let's see if the wife likes it.
Gavin, that looks so good.
Like your line?
Yay! Can we put it in their house?
That's what I need your help with.
Yes!
And here it is in its new home. If you had any thoughts about this build or you learned something, go ahead and throw a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if any tools caught your eye, I will have affiliate links to all of those in the description below. If you want to follow along on the day-to-day of the things that we're learning, designing, and making at 42 Pursuit, follow us over at 42.pursuit on Instagram. I'll have a link for that below as well. Thanks for sticking around. Take care. Maybe not my best idea.